Part 1, Chapter 5, Reading 1 of Oblomov by Ivan Alexandrovich Goncharov, translated by C.J. Hogarth. We find ourselves transported to a land where neither sea nor mountains, nor crags, nor precipices, nor lonely forest exists, where, in short, there exists nothing grand or wild or immense. Of what advantage, indeed, is the grand, the immense? The ocean depresses the soul of man, and at the sight of its boundless expanse of billows, an expanse whereon the weary eye is allowed no resting place from the uniformity of the picture, the heart of man grows troubled within him, and he derives no solace from the roaring and mad rolling of the waves. Ever since the world began, those waves have sung the same dim, enigmatical song. Ever since the world began, they have voiced but the querulous lament of a monster which, everlastingly doomed to torment, utters a chorus of shrill, malicious cries. On the shores of the sea no bird warbles, only silent gulls, lost in spirits, flit wearily along its margin or circle over its surface. In the presence of that turmoil of nature, the roar even of the wildest beasts sounds weak, and the voice of man becomes wholly overwhelmed. Yes, beside it, man's form looks so small and fragile that it is swallowed up amid the myriad details of the gigantic picture. That alone may be why contemplation of the ocean depresses man's soul. During periods also of calm and immobility, his spirit derives no comfort from the spectacle, for in the scarcely perceptible oscillation of the watery mass he sees ever the slumbering, incomprehensible force which until recently has been mocking his proud will and, as it were, submerging his boldest schemes, his most dearly cherished labours and endeavours. In the same way, mountains and gorges were not created to afford man encouragement, inasmuch as, with their terrible, menacing aspect, they seem to him the fangs and talons of some gigantic wild beast, of a beast which is reaching forth in an effort to devour him. Too vividly they remind him of his own frail build, too painfully they cause him to go in fear for his life, and over the summits of those crags and precipices the heavens look so remote and unattainable that they seem to have become removed out of the ken of humanity. Not so that peaceful corner of the earth upon which our hero in his slumber opened his eyes. There, on the contrary, the heavens seemed to hug the earth, not in order that they might the better aim their thunderbolts, but in order that they might the closer enfold it in a loving embrace. In fact, they hovered low in order that, like a sheltering paternal roof, they might guard this chosen corner of the earth from every adversity. Meanwhile the sun shone warm and bright during half the year, and, withdrawing, did so slowly and reluctantly that it seemed ever to be turning back for one more look at the beloved spot, as though wishing to give it one more bright, warm day before the approaching weather of autumn. Also, the hills of that spot were no more than reduced models of the terrible mountains which in other localities rear themselves to affright the imagination. Rather, they resembled the gentle slopes down which one may roll in sport, or where one may sit and gaze dreamily at the declining sun. Below them, toying and frisking, ran a stream. In one place it discharged itself into a broad pool, in another it hurried along in a narrow thread, in a third it slackened its pace to a sudden mood of reverie, and, barely gliding over the stones, threw out on either side small rivulets, whereof the gentle burbling seemed to invite sleep. Everywhere the vicinity of this corner of the earth presented a series of landscape studies and cheerful, smiling vistas. The sandy, shelving bank of the stream, a small copse which descended from the summit of that bank to the water, a winding ravine of which the depths were penetrated by a rill, a plantation of birch trees — all these things seemed purposely to be fitted into one another, and to have been drawn by the hand of a master. Both the troubled heart and the heart which has never known care might have yearned to hide themselves in this forgotten corner of the world, and to live its life of ineffable happiness. Everything promised a quiet existence, which should last until the grey hairs were come, and thereafter a death so gradual as almost to resemble the approach of sleep. There the yearly round fulfills itself in a regular serene order, as the calendar ordains. Spring comes in March, when turbulent rivulets begin to run from the hills, and the earth, thawing, steams with tepid vapour. Then the peasant, doffing his sheepskin, goes out in shirt-sleeves alone, and shades his eyes with his hand, as gently he shrugs his shoulders and drinks his fill of the gleaming sunlight. Then, with a shaft in either hand, he draws forth the cart which has been lying, bottom upwards, under the tilt-shed, or examines and sounds with his foot the plough which has been reposing in the penthouse. All this is in preparation for the usual routine of toil, since in that region spring sees no return of sudden snowstorms to heap the fields and crack the branches. On the other hand, winter, like a cold, unapproachable beauty, retains her character until the lawful season of thaw has arrived. Never does she mock one with unexpected softenings of the air. Never does she triple harness the earth with unheard-of degrees of frost. Everything proceeds according to rote, according to a generally prescribed order of nature. Although in November there begins snow and frost, which towards the festival of Epiphany increases to the point of freezing to an icicle the beard of the peasant who has stepped out of his hut for a breath of fresh air, the sensitive nose can, by February, detect the kindly odour of approaching spring. Next, the summer is peculiarly ravishing. Only in that particular spot can one find that fresh, dry perfume which is the scent neither of laurel nor of lemon, but of mingled wormwood, pine, and cherry blossom. Only there also can one find those bright days when the sun's rays are warm but never scorching, and the sky remains cloudless for 3 months on end. As the bright days draw on, they lengthen week by week, and during that period the evenings are hot and the nights stifling, while the stars twinkle in the heavens with the welcoming mien of friends. And when rain at length arrives, how beneficent is its coming! Boisterously, richly, merrily it spates forth, like the large hot tears of a man unexpectedly relieved of care, and as soon as ever it has passed, the sun appears with a new smile of love, to dry the fields and the hillocks, and to cause all the countryside to assume an answering smile of delight. How gladly, too, the peasant greets the rain! "The good rain washes us, and the sun will dry us again," is his saying, as he exposes his face to the tepid downpour and lets it play upon his shoulders and back. Moreover, in that region thunder is never terrible, but rather benevolent, and always occurs at one particular season, generally on St. Elias' Day, in order that the people's established tradition may be fulfilled. Also, it would appear that every year both the number and the intensity of the peals remained the same, as though for each year the heavenly treasure had allotted a given measure of electricity. But of terrible and destructive storms that country can show no record. Nor has the country whereof I am speaking ever been visited with the Egyptian or other plagues. Never has any member of its population beheld a dire manifestation of heaven, nor a thunderbolt, nor an unlooked-for darkness. Nor do venomous vermin abide there, and the locust comes not thither. And lions, tigers, bears, and wolves are unknown, owing to the fact that the country contains no fastness for them to dwell in. In short, over the fields and around the village wander only lowing cattle, bleating sheep, and cackling poultry. Yet none but God knows whether a poet or a visionary would find himself satisfied with the natural features of this peaceful spot. Such gentlemen, we know, love to gaze upon the moon, and to listen to the strains of nightingales. They love to see Luna clothe herself in coquettish aureate cloud, and then glide mysteriously through the boughs of trees, and send forth clusters of silver beams to delight the eyes of her worshippers. But in this country of Oblomov's dream no one knows such a moon. There Luna's features, as she looks down upon the villages and the fields, resembles rather a polished, cheery copper basin, and in vain would the poet fasten ravished eyes upon her, for she would return his gaze with the same indifference as that with which a round-faced rustic beauty meets the eloquent, passionate glances of a town gallant. Nor has a nightingale ever been heard in that country, perchance for the reason that the region contains no shaded arbours or gardens of roses. But what an abundance of quails it can show, so much that in a summer, when the harvest is in course of being gathered, urchins catch them even in their hands. Yet it must not be supposed that thereafter the quails furnish a gastronomic dainty. Such an outrage would be repugnant to the moral sense of the inhabitants, since the quail is a bird, and therefore legally prohibited from being used for food. Consequently, it lives but to delight the popular ear with its song, and in almost every house there hangs beneath the eaves a wicker cage wherein a member of that feathered species sits penned. Even the general aspect of this modest, unaffected spot would fail to please the poet or the visionary. Never would it be theirs to behold a scene in which all nature — woodland, lake, cotter's hut, and sandy hillside — is burning with a purplish glow, while sharply defined against a purple background may be seen, moving along a sandy, winding road, a cavalcade of countrymen in attendance upon some great lady who is journeying towards a ruined castle, a castle where they will find awaiting them the telling of legends concerning the War of the Roses, the eating of wild goats for supper, and the singing of ballads to the lute by a young English damsel, a scene of Scottish or Swiss flavour, of the kind which has been made familiar to our imagination by the pen of Sir Walter Scott. Of this there is nothing in our country. How quiet and dreamy are the 3 or 4 villages which constitute that restful region! They lie not far from one another, and seem to have been thrown into their respective positions by some giant hand, and ever since to have maintained those positions. In particular, one hut stands on the edge of a ravine, with one half its bulk projecting over the declivity, but supported on 3 props. Within it some 3 or 4 generations have spent happy, peaceful lives. For though it looks scarcely large enough to house a chicken, it is none the less tenanted by a well-to-do peasant and his wife. Onisim Suslov is the peasant's name, and he cannot stand upright in his abode. The veranda actually overhangs the ravine, and to reach it one has with one hand to grasp the herbage, and with the other the gable before setting foot upon the structure itself. Another of the huts is, as it were, gummed to the side of a hill like a swallow's nest, while 3 others stand close to it, and 2 are situated at the bottom of the ravine. In the village all is quiet. The doors of its solitary little dwelling stand open, but not a soul is to be seen. Only the flies circle and buzz in clusters. Were you to enter one of the huts, you would call aloud in vain, for your only answer would be the death-like silence, except that here and there you might hear the gasping of an invalid, or the deep cough of some old woman who is living out her days upon the stove. Also there might appear from behind the fence a long-haired, bare-footed youngster of 3, clad only in a shirt, who would gaze mutely at the newcomer and then timidly hide himself again. The same deep silence, the same deep peace lies also upon the fields. Only somewhere over the distant soil there can be seen moving, like an ant, a sunburnt ploughman. Occasionally he leans upon his plough to clear his forehead of the sweat. Even the manners of that region are possessed of a still restfulness which nothing can disturb. Never has a robbery or a murder or a similar happening been known there. Never have the inhabitants succumbed to strong passions or experienced hazardous adventures. Indeed, what passions, what adventures would have the power to move them? No man has ever strayed beyond his own circle, for the local inhabitants dwell far from other men, and both the nearest village and the nearest country town lie distant from 25 to 30 versts. True, at given seasons the peasants cart their grain to the river wharf which lies nearest to them, and once a year also they attend a fair, but they maintain no relations beyond these. In fact, all their interests are centred in themselves. True, they know that 80 versts away there stands the provincial capital, but few of them have ever journeyed thither. Also they know that beyond it stands Saratov and Nizhny Novgorod. Likewise, they have heard that such places as Moscow and Petrograd exist, and that on the farther side of them dwell folk who are known as Germans and French. But beyond that point there begins for them, as it did for the ancients, a mysterious world of unknown countries which are peopled with monsters and two-headed giants, and bounded on the outer side by a void of mist, and again by the colossal fish which bears the world on its back. Moreover, since this peaceful corner of the universe is almost inaccessible, there filters thither but few items of news concerning the great white universe. Indeed, even traders in rustic wares who live 20 versts away know no more than they do. Likewise, it never enters into their heads to compare their lot with those of other men, to inquire whether other men are rich or poor, comfortable or in need. For these peasants live in the fortunate belief that no circumstances could ever be different from their own, that all other folk must surely be living even as they are, and that to live in any other fashion would be a sin. Were you to assure them that others plough, sow, reap, or sell produce in any way than that which obtains in this particular spot, the inhabitants would not believe you. That being so, how could any element of vexation or disturbance ever come nigh them? True, they resemble the rest of humanity in that they have their cares and weaknesses and obligations of tax payment, and fits of laziness and lethargy, but these press upon them but lightly, and occasion no real stirring of the blood. Indeed, during the past 5 years, not a single soul of that local population of hundreds has died either a violent death or a natural. Even should a man or woman expire of old age or a senile disease, it is not long before the rest have got over their astonishment at the unusual occurrence. In the same way, after the trader Taras had come near to steaming himself to death in his hut, and had had to be revived with cold water, the affair caused scarcely any stir in the neighbourhood. Of crimes, one only, that of theft of produce from the market gardens, is at all prevalent. Also once 2 pigs and a chicken mysteriously disappeared. True, the latter event threw the district into something of a turmoil, but was unanimously ascribed to a pedlar who, the previous evening, had passed through the district on his way to a fair. In general, such untoward incidents are of the greatest rarity. However, in a ditch in a paddock near the bridge once there was found lying a man, apparently a member of a party which had just traversed the neighbourhood en route for the country town. Some boys were the first to notice him, and at once they came running home with a horrifying tale of a great serpent or werewolf which was crouching in a hole. To this they added a statement that the said creature had pursued them and come near to devouring Kuzka. From far and near the peasants armed themselves with hatchets and pitchforks and proceeded to the ditch en masse. "Whither away?" the old men said reprovingly. "Are you mad? What do you want to do? Leave things alone, and no harm will come of it." Nevertheless, the peasants set forth, and when about 100 paces from the spot began to adjure the monster in varying terms. But no answer was returned. Next, after halting a moment, the party advanced a little further. The man seemed still to be lying in the ditch, with his head resting against a fence. while beside him lay a satchel and a cudgel, on the latter of which was slung a pair of boots. Yet the peasants could not summon up the necessary courage to approach him or touch him. " Hi, friend !" they shouted, one scratching his head and another the back of his neck. " What are you doing there? Who are you? What is the matter? " The traveller made as though to raise his head a little, but failed. Evidently he was ill or tired out. Then a peasant ventured to touch him with a pitchfork. " Don't interfere with him ! Don't interfere with him !" cried the rest. " How do we know what he is, seeing that he refuses to speak? Leave him alone, friends." " Yes, we had better go away," added certain others. " What has he to do with us? Harm might come of him." So all returned to the village, and told the elder men that lying in the ditch there was a strange man who would not speak, and whose identity was known only to God. " If he does not belong to these parts, leave him alone," advised the elders from the spot where, with hands on knees, they were sitting resting on a bank. " Yes, leave him to himself. 'Tis no use your going there." Chapter 5. Reading 1.